The views, information, and opinions expressed during the following program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the views of Access Communications, its representatives, or its employees.
The RCMP Heritage Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organisation mandated to share the story of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is one of those stories, part of your heritage.
Well, I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the military, and I was born in London, Ontario, and then shortly after we got transferred overseas to Germany. And I guess it was in Germany that I became interested in the Mounted Police. My mom tells me that I wanted an RCMP Sam Brown belt and a Stetson and that, and I guess that's what interested me. I said I was always going to be a Mountie. So growing up in military communities, I guess my interest was always there. And when I left high school, I decided to join the Army rather than the RCMP. And I think it was an age thing because I left home just at 17, and I joined the military at age 18 and spent 6 years in the military. And while I was in the military, I was in the military police. And a lot of the fellas in the military police said, "Why are you in the Army? Why aren't you in the RCMP?" So I guess that renewed my interest in the RCMP. And my last posting in the military was in Edmonton with the Canadian Airborne Regiment. And when I was there, I'd gone down to Edmonton Detachment and applied for the RCMP and was accepted. But I had to be discharged from the Army, of course. And so the RCMP said, "Yes, you made it, you're in, and come and join us." And so I went back to the military and I asked for my discharge, my release, and then they said, "No, you're scheduled to go overseas, so you're not eligible for release." So I went back to the RCMP in Edmonton and said they won't release me. And they said, "Well, go on your overseas tour, and then when you come back, your position will be waiting for you. You can join the Mounted Police then. We'll just keep your application active." So I went overseas with the Airborne Regiment to Cyprus and spent 6 months there and maintained contact with the recruiters in Edmonton. And when I came back, I had my discharge and I joined the RCMP. And ironically, I had dual service because I was still in the RCMP, or still in the military when I started depot. There was a 2-week overlap between my discharge leave and my depot leave. And so when I got to depot, it was kind of interesting. I found there was an awful lot of different things that were unique and brand new to me at depot, but a lot of things that were pretty much the same as the Army, like barrack room life, the discipline, the drill, the PT, and all of those sorts of things were very similar in the Army. But I did think that in the RCMP there was a lot more emphasis put on firearms, a lot more emphasis on academics, and that were challenging and very rewarding. And so for me, depot was an interesting time. Some parts were easier than others, and again, the easier parts for me was adjusting to the barrack room sort of atmosphere and the discipline side of things. After depot, when I finished depot, and it was in the spring of 1975, my first posting was Elk Point, Alberta, and I couldn't find it on the map. But what I did find on the map was that Elk Point, part of their detachment area was Frog Lake. And remembering the history of the force and the Frog Lake Massacre in the Northwest Rebellion and that. So that kind of resonated with me, that, going back in history. So Elk Point, Alberta was my first detachment. It was a corporal's detachment with 3 constables. We were all 3 single constables, and the detachment there was in an old courthouse. And the cell was more a cage, and it was an open concept. So half or less than half, about a quarter of the building was the detachment, the rest was the courthouse. So, and all of us boarded out, all of the single guys boarded at that time in the town. So it was a great experience, great area of Alberta. A lot of First Nations policing, a lot of rural farming communities within the area. So it was quite an experience in Elk Point. I went out to Frog Lake to serve a summons on an individual. And when I got out there, I drove up in the police car to this home and asked for this individual, and it was his dad that was there, and he said that this fellow wasn't there. He was up in the hills in the forest. And so I said, well, can I drive there? He says, no, you have to go by horse or walk. So I said, well, do you have a horse? And he says, yeah, I have a saddle pony. He says, can you ride? And I'd never been on a horse in my life at that time. And I thought, well, I'm a Mountie, and I have to say I can ride a horse. So I said, oh, of course I can ride a horse. So he sent another young fella out to saddle this horse. And then he brought the horse out to me and said, here it is, and then just follow the trail. And it's about an hour up, and you'll come to this cabin where his son was. So I get on this horse, and I always remembered, well, you should get on the left side of the horse. I didn't know why or for whatever reason. So I'm trying to do this, and finally I get on this horse, and then they had a dog there. So as soon as I'm on the horse and I'm pointing in the right direction, then the dog started barking. And then the horse took off. And there I was, probably 8 feet off the saddle, and I could hear all of the people laughing, the old fella there laughing, and his wife laughing, and the kids kind of jeering at me. And but that was quite the experience. But when I got to the cabin where this individual was, he and his wife were there, and you could just see not the shock, but the amazement that a Mountie would be riding into a cabin in 1975 to see him. So that really stood out for me. Was my first summons I ever served was from a horseback. Yeah, I had the good fortune to apply for equitation training and went on equitation training and went back on the musical ride and spent 2 years, 1978, 1979, on the musical ride. And those were great years. The instructional staff there always told us that it was hard work, but it would be the 2 years that we most remembered in our service. And we had some great opportunities there. We traveled throughout North America, extensively in the United States, and we toured every province in Canada except British Columbia. And I think that the thing that stands out most for me on the musical ride was being representatives of the RCMP in so many different communities and internationally representing Canada and the RCMP. The sorts of questions that we were asked and the interest that so many people had, especially Americans, about Canada, about the RCMP. And the horses is what drew people to us. That kind of broke down the barrier where the horses, people come up, pet the horse, or ask what the horse's name was. So that started the conversation, and then it flowed into other things. And at that time, there was a lot of political questions in Canada about the Quebec government at the time. Mr. Lévesque was elected, and so people were asking us lots of questions about Canada politics and that. So it introduced all of the members of the musical ride on the need to be very professional and very discreet in how you dealt with the media and what you said when you were representing Canada. And so it was interesting times. There's lots of shows that really stand out, but the show that stood out for me was we were in the Cow Palace in San Francisco, and we entered the arena, and as we were going into the arena, my lance bucket, which is what you have your lance attached to your stirrup on your right side, got hooked on the door as we came in, and it ripped my stirrup off, and so I'm holding my lance in my hand without putting in a lance bucket, starting the musical ride. And the musical ride is about 22 minutes long. So for the whole musical ride, I had to hold my lance on the toe of my boot most of the time, or some of the time, but hold it up steady with the rest of the musical ride and everybody else. And halfway through the musical ride, you have a break, more or less, for the horses where you do lance drill. And it just so happened the position that I had doing lance drill was right in the front rank, and the riding master was right there in front of me, watching me. And my arm was just about falling off because it was so tired. And I thought, oh, and he was a real stickler for lance drill, that you had to do it proper. So he knew that I didn't have a stirrup and I'd done this whole time, but I thought, man, I got to do this right and got to do it proper. So that I got through that okay, but that's the most memorable time that I had, when I lost my stirrup and my lance bucket. Off the music ride, I was interviewed by the staffing officer, who assured me that I was going to go to the north. And we were, again, I think in Los Angeles, when we got our transfers. And I was told I was being transferred to K Division, not to the north. So I was getting transferred to Alberta, not to the north. And I was pretty disappointed. When the ride wound up and I went on vacation and came back, my transfer had been changed and I was going back north. So they said, report to Yellowknife Detachment, because we don't know where you're going. So, well, it wasn't Yellowknife Detachment, it was Yellowknife Headquarters. Report to G Division Headquarters in Yellowknife. So I report there, and they tell me that they decided that I'm going to a place called Rankin Inlet, which is on the Hudson Bay coast in the Keewatin area, so it's just north of Manitoba. And that was my first posting, and I traveled by police plane from Yellowknife to Rankin Inlet, and it was in January that I went there. And it was, Rankin Inlet's a very isolated point. It's flat, it's windy, cold, and my first experience, it was dark when I arrived, and I thought, my God, what have I got myself into? Because I'd always wanted to do Northern Service, hearing so much about the Mounted Police and what they did in the North. But it was a great spot. At that time, we, in Rankin Inlet, we policed basically the whole Keewatin. There was we looked after Repulse Bay, Coral Harbor, Whale Cove, and Chesterfield Inlet. So there was a lot of travel for the 3 constables to these different settlements. And we traveled either by boat or by snowmobile or skidoo, or by aircraft to these places. So we would travel generally at 1 week a month. Each of us would travel to a different community and spend the week in that community and do patrols of that nature. And when I first went there, we had patrol cabins in some of the communities, but most, there was no police station or no police cabins there. So we conducted police activities either out of the band office or the Hamlet office or at the transit quarters. So, but the things that stand out for me there was the patrols by snowmobile and by boat to the different communities. I think the people appreciated seeing the police coming by boat or by snowmobile to their various communities rather than flying in and out. And it gave you a little bit more personal approach that you were willing to travel in that fashion, and that was the fashion that they traveled. They couldn't afford the air travel; it was so expensive up north. I think it was challenging. You spent an awful lot of time doing travel and preparing for the travel and those sorts of things, rather than doing police work. And I guess if you think about what it must have been like in the early years of the RCMP, they spent so much time traveling, hunting, feeding, the dogs, and preparing for the travel. And most of the time was spent getting to wherever you were getting to and then doing the policing function. And I guess when you think about today in rural policing, it's how do you get from point A to point B out in rural Canada? Your travel time to answer a complaint or to interview somebody or to provide some sort of police service. Most of your time is spent traveling to that point rather than actually taking the statement as an example. So I found that was probably the biggest difference, but I think that allowed you an awful lot of interaction with community people too. So instead of just going in and doing the policing function, you repaired broken parts off some of the equipment that you had. You were preparing the sleds for travel. You were preparing the boats for travel. You were asking directions. So you interacted with people in a different fashion rather than just going in and asking specific questions about a crime or about police sort of activities. So I think that bridged the gap, somewhat similar to what we discussed on the musical ride. The horse bridged the gap, and I think the equipment bridged the gap, or the environment bridged the gap. How you dressed, how you didn't dress, what route you took, what route you didn't take. The ice was bad here. Those sorts of things. I think made you, or got you closer to the community and to the people that live there. And I think the people saw that you were willing to go out and be challenged by the environment, just as they're challenged by the environment. I had asked to come to Depot as an instructor because I thought I'd been blessed with so many different experiences in the RCMP that I thought I could really contribute to helping the recruits or the young members come through. Also, Depot was a very positive environment. Everybody that was there wanted to be there. They had asked to be there. It was all volunteers to come there. And just the way Depot was run by the administrative staff and by the commanding officer and the sergeant major at the time, it was just a good spot to be, I thought. And two, it was a break from the field. And selfishly, I think if members need a break from the shift work, from what they see and what they do in policing. And I don't think that you can do police work for 20, 25, or 30 years continually without a break. It just doesn't make much sense to me. So to me, it was a bit of a break, a 3-year break. And I found that I learned so much from my peers and those that I reported to, the supervisors, but I learned so much from the recruits too, to get in touch with what the young people were looking at and what their expectations were in policing and that. So to me, it was a very positive experience, both by the opportunity to teach, to learn how to teach, and to relay to the recruits what it's like out in the field. And I think to bring change to the curriculum at Depot at the time as well, to refresh some of the way things were done or the thinking, to say this is the reality in the field today. So that caused some change, and I think that's a constant at Depot. So to me, it was a very positive experience, both to contribute to the recruits and to depot itself, but also selfishly to learn an awful lot from everybody that was at depot at the time, and most certainly from the recruits. From depot, I went back to Alberta for a second time, and served in a number of communities there, and then I got commissioned out of Alberta and got transferred to Nova Scotia, and that was a great experience, and to be commissioned, but it was a great experience to go to Nova Scotia. My wife's people are all from Nova Scotia, so it was a bit of a homecoming, and the last time I had ever been in Nova Scotia was, again, in the military. I was stationed in Cornwallis doing my basic training there, so it was great to go to Nova Scotia. And I had great opportunities, again, in H Division in Nova Scotia. My first posting was as the officer in charge of the Aboriginal and Diversity Program for Nova Scotia. Then I went on to command Coal Harbour Detachment. Then I was seconded to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. I was the first officers seconded to the Fisheries and Oceans on the East Coast. And that was a great experience working with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And I concluded by being the support services officer before I was transferred away from Nova Scotia. But while I was there, I had the opportunity. The commanding officer was very supportive and allowed me to go on my first overseas mission within the RCMP to Kosovo in 1999, which was a great experience to go to Kosovo and be part of the first United Nations police contingent on the ground. So we were the first Canadian police, civilian police, in Kosovo in 1999. There was about 100 of us from the RCMP and other Canadian police services. So that was a great experience to have that opportunity to go there. Well, in Kosovo at that time, when we arrived, the bombing had just stopped. It was still very much martial law. It was like going back in time from a police perspective. There was no police force. There was no laws. There was nothing there, just because of the situation there. The occupants, the Kosovars there, didn't recognize the law, which was Serbian law, so they didn't recognize that. The police force had been disbanded or disintegrated. There was virtually no police agency. So the United Nations, when we went in there, was an executive mission. In other words, we were performing policing functions there. So a number of the Canadian contingent that comprised of quite a number of United Nations international police officers, a number were doing executive duties throughout the country, so delivering a police service. Others were administrating the United Nations police service. Others training the police. And then we were also training and recruiting and trying to formulate or build a new Kosovo police service to replace what was there before. When we first arrived there, the power, electricity was pretty well, it was not functioning, so you didn't have any computers, you didn't have any of these sorts of things, so everything reverted back to paper and pencil. And even with that, we didn't have enough paper to do the job. We had no forms. You had no laws to arrest people. So the laws that we did use were the existing Serbian law, as well as human rights legislation that we used. So the United Nations human rights concept. And it was difficult times for the leadership there because everybody brought with them their Canadian values, their Canadian law. The Danes brought their Danish concept, the Germans brought their concept, the Brits brought their concept. So it was difficult from a management perspective to deliver a police service. So it was extremely difficult for the operations side of the house. And who was in charge of the operations side of the house was a Canadian. And when you looked at an awful lot of things that happened over there, Canadians occupied a number of the key positions. The Commissioner of Police was a Dane, and then his two deputies were, one was an American, one was a Swede, but all of the other positions, key positions, were held by Canadians. And I think that speaks volumes for the caliber of police officer that was there, both the operational officers and the administrative side of the Canadian contingent. In the RCMP, I think international policing is a very, very important area that the RCMP in Canada gains so much from. And I think a lot of people don't recognize the value added there. It builds a number of different relationships, and it allows Canada to contribute to other police agencies and that. The advantage that I had was after Kosovo, I had the opportunity to serve twice in Afghanistan on 2 different tours in Afghanistan, once with the European Union police mission, and then the second time as the Canadian commander of all Canadian police assets and programs in Afghanistan. And the first years that I was in Afghanistan with the Europeans was challenging because it was in transition. This was in 2008, 2009. And the country was always transitioning, depending on who was in command and what NATO command was there and what their objective was. The war was going on, the insurgency was going on. And in all of that, you're trying to build a police agency, or you're trying to improve and build a modern police service that's ethical, that's void of corruption, that practices modern police techniques, bearing in mind that they don't have the equipment or the legislation in place to say be compared to Canada or the US or to a European model. But the principles, the core principles of policing was what was trying to be delivered.